Welcome once again to the Autosportradio.com Zoom program. We are still at the Grand King Race Shop, and I can't stress enough, if you get a chance, once things open, and it's not yet, of course, and maybe getting a little worse, but when you get a chance, you need to come down here and take a look. They got cars in here that are spectacular, and they cover all series, Indy cars, sprint cars, midgets, they got them all. Antique cars. So if you get a chance, come on down. Today's program is presented by Honda and Honda HPD, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the NTT IndyCar Series, SVRA, and McGilvery's Pub and Speedway. If you haven't been to McGilvery's yet, you need to go. The place has been redone. It's spectacular. It's non-smoking. And in order to keep it that way, we got to support them. The food is always good. And the adult beverages are ice cold. So you get a chance, stop by. We have computer problems. I should say I do. And if you do, I got a solution for you. We have a new computer guy. It's A+ Affordable Computer Doctor. He's a doctor because when I was a kid, doctors made house calls. And Dr. Steve Freeze makes house calls to take care of your computer. So give him a call. Tell him your problem. If need be, you can come by. Number is 317-328-0766. And of course, as I always say, everybody's favorite doctor's appointment with the dentist. Well, I've got the best there is. Top-rated, if not the top-rated dental practice in the state, the Indy Dental Group. 500 veteran Dr. Jack Miller and his wife, Dr. Liz Lewis, have a spectacular practice. We love the people. It's a great place. If you have a problem, want to have it checked out, give them a call, make a reservation. Number is 317-846-6125. Have you ever wondered what it's like to drive your favorite race car on your favorite track? From dirt track midgets at the Chili Bowl to Formula One at Nuremberg Ring, Indy Simulation can put you in the driver's seat of their Sim Experience full motion race simulator. Take your choice of over 160 cars and tracks in iRacing, the same simulation professional drivers use to race their real world rivals. Learn more tracks and stay sharp between races. Just visit Indy Sim, that's indysim.com, to book your free demonstration ride. You'll love it. I've done it. It's really good. And Kerry Bettenhausen runs it, so you can't go wrong there. That's indysim.com. If you need the urge to see what's it like to really be in a two-seater, well, there's a solution. You can do that. You can get a hold of the Indy Racing Experience. Go to indyracingexperience.com. Find a date that will work for you, and they're not sure where all they're going, so you got to keep up with that. And you find a date that'll work, and in the promo box, put DK1, you get a 50% discount. Or you can call Shonda, number is 317-243-7171. It's an exciting ride. You'll love every minute of it, and you'll understand why these guys and gals love to drive these cars. Is it time to renew your insurance on your home, your car, or your commercial business, your property? Do what most of us have done. Call Mike Pardee at VP Insurance. He's located at 5004 West 16th Street in Speedway. Give him a call, tell him what you need, and he'll tell you, and you get a quote, and you'll be surprised. You get better coverage for less money. His number is 317-248-0070. That's VP Insurance and Speedway. Mike Pardee, 317-248-0070. And if you are a Trans Am fan from the days gone by, it's coming back. Or if you're a vintage car fan, you need to subscribe to Speed Tour magazine. Just go to svra.com and subscribe. It's a great magazine, great stories, and it tells you if you can make it to an event. It tells you where sites to see and restaurants to visit. You'll love it. So go to svra.com, subscribe to Speed Tour, and while you're there, click on the schedule button and see where their next event is and when. Have you an interest in having a vintage car, or do you have one that needs to be restored? Well, the Grand King Shops can help you on both hands. Give them a call, tell them what you have or what you're looking for, and they can help you out. The number is 317-820-3595. And if you want to visit the shop, call the same number and see if you can work out a time and a day when you can get in. They have other businesses, so they need to know you're coming. That's 317-820-3595. My guest today is a gentleman we've never talked to. In fact, I've never seen him live and in color, but I have read it. He has made his journey after graduating from IU through the sporting world and newspaper. He always wanted to write, and he has landed at the Indy Star. And when Jim Aiello went to the Colts, Nathan Brown took over the IndyCar, and he's doing a spectacular job, and I welcome him today. Thanks, Nathan, for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
You graduated from IU. What was your goal when you graduated? I think you have a degree in journalism, or I believe.
I
What
do,
was your
yes.
goal?
Biggest goal out of college, gosh, was just to get a job. I mean, even nowadays, it's a little tough starting off in journalism, but it was probably even tougher back then. I remember rifling through all of these job sites, just trying to find anyone that was looking for a sports reporter covering anything from high schools to a small, D2, D1 college to, anything I could find. I had a couple internships after college at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix for a couple months, and then with the Virginia Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia for 5 months or so. And that whole time, really, I was looking every single day, trying to find something that could just get me on the right foot and get started on this journey of becoming a sports writer.
Going from Arizona to Virginia, did you live out of a suitcase?
Just about. My dad can tell you. He's taken a lot of these trips out. Obviously, as you mentioned, I grew up in Indiana. Went to IU. Drove out with everything that could fit in my car for a temporary apartment in Arizona. Drove back over to Virginia for my internship, and then a couple months after that, then drove out to California. So we've done this cross country road trip thing a handful of times, and have gotten fairly used to the middle of the country and going back and forth.
You got engaged in California, so I assume you have married a California girl.
Not a California girl, actually. She actually was a transplant from there, just as I was. My wife, Daniela, actually grew up in Colombia, South America, and moved to the Boston area. Her family did when she was in high school. She went to New York University and graduated from there in 2016, and ended up getting a job at the same newspaper that I did just a couple years after I'd started at the Desert Sun newspaper, which is in Palm Springs, California. So we met there, started dating, got engaged, and eventually actually moved back to the East Coast for a brief period of time where she was working in Manhattan, doing some writing and some editing out there, and I was doing a couple different part-time jobs.
Was your any intention of getting into motorsports? Did you want to get into sports writing? Was that your intention somewhere, somehow, some way?
Yeah, really, it was just, at least at the start, those first few years, it was just sports writing. I covered high school sports out in California. I wrote for MILB.com in New York City, where we were living, covering minor league baseball at nights during 2018. I moved to New Orleans for less than a year, actually, before this job at the Indy Star, and was covering everything from the Saints to the Pelicans when they drafted Zion Williamson to high school sports. It's kind of been a grab bag of things, but this, as you mentioned, this job opened up last summer when Jim Aiello stayed with the Star and moved over to the Colts beat. And it was something, actually, at the time, my wife and I were living in two separate places. She was still out in the New York City area, and I was in New Orleans. I moved out there just for the opportunity to have a full-time job, and we hoped that we would kind of figure things out and eventually end up in the same city. And we both actually ended up finding jobs that we were really excited about and applied for in the Indianapolis area, and things just happened to work out for both of us. And so that's how we ended up here.
Well, I'm glad you made it. When Jim went to the Colts and you took over, I read some of your stuff and I said, I don't think he's been around motorsports a long time, but you sure have really picked up on it. Have you found it easy to work with these guys, the drivers, team owners, sponsors, and so forth, as opposed to other sports?
Yeah, it really has been. Especially at a professional level, and a lot of people told me this coming in, but really at a professional level, the kind of access and the teamwork, I guess, maybe for lack of a better word, help on getting coverage from a pro sports level in IndyCar is really unmatched. I've done, I've covered an NFC championship game with the Saints, covered the draft with Zion Williamson. I've covered back in my college days a lot of NCAA basketball back when IU was a number one ranked team there several years back. and the ease of access that you can have with these drivers and these team owners just makes this job so much easier. And I think in a lot of ways, helps me as a driver, but I think it also helps, hopefully eventually in years down the road, grow some more attention for this sport that I know has slowly been building and growing a fan base for these last couple of years.
When you first got here and they said, you heard of the Indy car, we'd like you to write on it because Jim has moved on to the Colts. How much knowledge did you have of the sport itself? Have you followed it? You paid a lot of attention to it?
Yeah, so I grew up in Noblesville, went to Noblesville High School. So my dad actually has been going to the 500 since the mid 80s. I started going, I can't remember the exact first year that I went, but it was sometime in the early 2000s. I've probably been to a dozen Indy 500s myself, or certainly close to that. So just kind of growing up, the 500 had been the only race that I actually been to, but watched some other races on TV every so often. And certainly once the 500 came around every year, was a great opportunity to kind of re-educate myself on, the top drivers and everyone involved in the sport. I hadn't been to a 500 since I think 2014 when Ryan Hunter-Reay narrowly beat out Elio in that race there down to the finish. But had certainly still been keeping an eye on it up until I took over the beat. So there was still a good amount that I had to learn pretty quickly, but it certainly wasn't anything that I didn't have any sort of a general knowledge base on.
And I assume, as you had indicated, that the drivers are easy access. If you need something, they will talk to you. If you want to do, like you said, you're not going to Mid-Ohio this weekend, but you will still be able to Zoom interview some of the drivers. It seems like and I've only been coming to the 500 since 1964, so I'm kind of still a little bit new at it, but they're very approachable. They're very easy to talk to, and they're smart enough to realize if you tell the world about them, people will pay attention.
Yeah, it goes from the drivers to the team owners to, for the most part, the PR reps, both at the team level and the series level, even the owners of the series. I mean, from Mark Miles, as far as officials go, to Doug Bowles and even Roger Penske. I mean, all those guys. If you're doing a good, reputable job covering this series, are more than willing to talk to you, not just to be helpful, but to get their message out. I think everyone in this series really understands the value that media can provide to this sport. You don't always see that. These last couple of years in some other leagues, you start seeing a lot of professional athletes kind of trying to take control of their own message through social media or other platforms, which is certainly their right. But I think there's something unique and unmatched on being able to sit down and talk to a writer about a piece and watch that kind of begin to develop.
Gannett is one of the largest newspaper companies in the country. Does what you put out, does it go to others besides the Indy Star?
Yeah. So last time I checked, I believe Gannett has 260 newspapers across the country. And anything that I write, if there's a town that, that has an IndyCar race, so they kind of have that base of fans, any of those newspapers can take and run my stuff under the USA Today network banner. So that's kind of one of the benefits that we have of being this large newspaper corporation, is just having folks kind of stationed in both big and small cities and states all over the country to kind of have this all these different bureaus of folks that are covering all different sorts of things. So IndyCar is just one small part of that, but it's nice to know that people all over the country are able to and exciting to read your stuff.
Do you hear back from any of the other cities and towns where the paper is published and your articles are written? Do you hear from them?
Yeah, on a big story you do occasionally. I mean, if it's something, it probably more likely when it's something to do with the series in general. You know, obviously, like when Roger Penske bought the series back, you know, when that was announced in early November of last year, you hear from people far and wide that just have a connection to IndyCar in general. More so, I mean, I guess even to an extent, when I've been writing about the 500 these last several weeks, and we've had all these changes going on for this race, you hear from ticket holders, not just from the Indianapolis area, but from other places in the country, whether it's, you know, Tennessee or Pennsylvania. You know, I'm trying to think of, I think I've even heard from someone from Arizona at some point, just folks that either want to make sure they understand what's going on because they have been a long time ticket holder for this race and they come back to Indiana every year, or just fans that in general just kind of want to be able to keep tabs of what's going on in the sport.
Well, as we all know, or at least most people know by now, because I put out my two Facebook and my website news about the change in things that just happened yesterday. Although I had heard about it as you had.
Mm-hmm.
It was officially announced that this weekend at Mid-Ohio is not going to be a one-race event. It's going to be a two-race event. Then when they go to Gateway near St. Louis, that's outside of St. Louis, it's going to be a two-race event. And in October, when they come back here to run the road course, that too will be a double-header event trying to make up, because I guess they're not going to California and Portland, which is a good move, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to go there.
Yeah, it's just kind of I think more than anything was kind of just an insurance move for the series. I mean, they're already sitting at 14 races, which is not something that you would want to have ideally in a normal season without all these conditions going on in the background, but it was certainly doable. But when you run the risk of possibly losing these 3 races in California and Portland combined, when you don't exactly know what the pandemic is going to be doing to those places, they're a couple of the either hardest hit places in the country or places that have the strictest restrictions at the moment. So I think it was a big move by IndyCar just to ensure that we can keep that number of 3 races on the calendar, whether they were run on the West Coast or whether they were run back here in the Midwest. And when you already have these other tracks, as you mentioned, Mid-Ohio, Gateway, and IMS on the road course that already have these race weekends planned, it's certainly not as difficult to just add another race onto that as it would be to go to a track that wasn't already planning to hold an IndyCar race and ask them to try and see if they can scramble to put something together. So I think it was maybe just a little bit of a Band-Aid of sorts, and hopefully we'll get through this year with 14 races and then get back to the drawing board for 2021 and beyond and see what the series schedule is going to look like on the long term.
Will you be attending? You said you're not going this weekend. Will you be going to Gateway?
At this point, that's kind of a little bit up in the air. A lot of that will depend on whether we will have, you know, a little bit more access to the drivers. As from an understandable standpoint, IndyCar has been pretty strict on not only who they allow into the track when they have races, but where folks can go. And at this point, media members haven't been able to have any sort of access in the paddock, the garages, or the pits, any of that. So all of our pre and post race interviews that we've done that you would traditionally do in the garages with various drivers after the race have just been done on Zoom calls. So that's part of the reason why you haven't seen, you know, I was able to go to the season opener at Texas Motor Speedway when things were still like that. But it's part of the reason that you probably haven't seen a whole lot of media traveling for these races, because you can still do a pretty good job of covering them from home. It certainly doesn't feel the same. There's kind of some indescribable thing that's just different about not being at the track and not hearing and seeing and kind of feeling the cars going around and being there live to cover it. But you're certainly more than capable of being able to do 90% or even 95% of what you would normally be allowed to do nowadays if you were at the track from home.
It's same. I just contacted Arnie at IndyCar to find out what the deal is going to be with media people, and he said they're not sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'm wondering if I'm going to be allowed. I've been going there again, as I said, since '64. Not that means if they don't want me there, that's fine. I got NBC Gold. I'll see most of it anyway on television, one way or another. So If I got a question, now I know your cell number, I'll ask you.
Of course.
Have you become a true race fan now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as you mentioned, I grew up watching the oval races on the 2.5 mile oval track at IMS, but I hadn't watched a ton of road and street course racing, and don't know that I had the appreciation for that as much as I really do now. I mean, there's certainly something special about seeing those cars on those tracks, and I really enjoyed, watching some of those races that we've seen at, whether it's been Road America, obviously was great. We had a short oval with Iowa that was something a little bit new for me to kind of watch and digest and learn about the series, and I'm really excited to, see some of these next couple races here at Mid-Ohio and Gateway, and just get a better understanding of the small little differences on these tracks, and how it makes the cars run differently, and which teams can continue to adjust to the season, and the kind of the compact nature that we have.
Well, the competition, I think, and you probably will agree, is second to none. I don't think there's certainly no open wheel series anywhere in the world that compares to the competition in IndyCar. Having said that, when you see that Scott Dixon won the first 3 races and Gannett won the first 4, you would say, well, there's not much competition. But that's not true. It's been very competitive. And on any given weekend, things, somebody can win. And there's many teams that are capable of winning. The only thing I thought, it was a great idea to run a doubleheader at Iowa, except for the crews for the Saturday race. Those poor guys that crashed the cars, Colton Herta and Will Power, they had a lot of work to do to get the car ready for the next day, where if they had a single race, it wouldn't have been that difficult. But they managed it, they did it, and they competed, and everything worked out. So it'll be interesting to see how it carries on from here.
You're right.
I see they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 cars they feel will be entered in 500 this year. I don't know if that's going to jump. If teams that normally or cars or guys that would normally enter 500 only may not show up, so they may have struggle getting 33 cars.
Yeah, that's the case as of now. They're as I said, or as you mentioned, they are at 30 confirmed. There's probably going to be one more announced here that I think we can be pretty comfortable to say is going to happen with Dreyer and Reinbold Racing's second car. But once you get beyond that, there's a lot of question marks, whether Carlin is going to field a second car, whether Dale Coyne Racing is going to have a third car, whether these entries from Dragon Speed or from Top Gun Racing are going to be able to meet the deadline of trying to start off practice on the first day on August 11th and qualifying on August 15th. I mean, those dates are creeping up here pretty quickly. It's 2 weeks now from today, as we talk now, from the opening of practice. So when you've got these teams that either haven't ever been in the 500 before or have only been in once or twice, and they're still kind of scrambling to put the money in the driver and update their cars that they have, it's going to be a lot of work that these teams are going to have to put in. I got to think there's going to be some way that they'll reach 33. I don't think Roger Penske's going to want to have his first Indy 500 be a race that isn't able to fill the entire field. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot more in these next couple weeks about how that's going to come together. But it's going to be a lot of scrambling from a lot of people just to get there.
Well, I have a feeling that the deadline date to enter will be extended if there's some hint that somebody could make it, given another few days. So I think when I came here in '64, there'd sometimes be 110 cars in it. I mean, the old garages had cars stacked on top of the other, with the exception of Jim Hurtubise. He'd enter 2 cars, and one of them, you lift the hood of the car up and it was full of beer. But he entered the car anyway. So if he got thirsty, you knew where to go for a quick beer. Have you found doing IndyCar and the other sports, you find that the drivers are easier to approach and easier to talk to?
I think in some way, part with IndyCar, just because I think the drivers in the series, they love the sport and they know that for the most part, the media that covers this series from a full-time perspective, like myself included, just really want to be able to tell. There's so many interesting stories in every major sport across the country. But I think we have the ability in IndyCar, or at least maybe a little bit easier time in telling some of those stories with a little bit more ease. And I think these drivers, I mean, they want to help us tell those stories because they love this sport and they want to see it grow, whether it's young guys in the series or older veterans that are only going to be around here for a couple more years. I think they really see the value in gaining, whether it's eyes watching the TV broadcast or fans wanting to come out and buy tickets. I think they see a lot of value in that, not only trying to introduce the sport to a little bit younger audience or trying to build fans and folks who, might be, folks that do have kids of their own. And if you can grasp someone, whether it's with a story in a newspaper or a segment during a race or a commercial or a philanthropy event that someone happens to be at and sees an IndyCar driver, I think for the most part, everyone in this series understands there's a lot of positive things that can be done with, working and cooperating with media. And for the most part, that's been a really nice, welcoming thing to see about covering this series.
Well, from my perspective, and as I say, I've been around a few weeks, your writing has really picked up. It's obvious you're now getting to understand the inside part of the sport, how it functions. The stories you've written on various drivers and teams have been very interesting. I think you've done a really nice job catching up in a relatively, to me, a short time. I've been around long. I couldn't write a story if I had to. And the strange thing is, I went to NASCAR races when you could shoot a shotgun and not hit anybody.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody there. And fortunately, a guy from RJ Reynolds took a liking to me, and I got to go to all the races and film them and all that stuff. So I've been there. I've been to Formula One races when you could get in. Now you can't even get close. But I've always found IndyCar to be very open, very friendly, very media interested. I've never really had any driver, even AJ Foyt, if I walked into his garage and want to talk to him, he'll do it. So it's a fun sport, and it's got to make your job a lot easier. But they
it really does. Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, going from helping out covering an NFL beat and covering the NBA, I mean, for the most part, you get access to these guys when they say you get access, whether it's after a practice or pre or post game. And you have to maybe be a little bit more creative. You have so much less time, so you can't probably juggle maybe quite as many stories at one time just because you have so little access. And it's really that sport also, I mean, those sports are so big on creating those relationships so that if you get to happen to get to know a player or a player's agent, sometimes you can organize some time to talk to guys outside of those organized environments. But with this series, I mean, for the most part, if you communicate with the PR rep and say, hey, this is a story I'm working on, this is why I like to talk to driver XYZ, teams from the big teams to the small teams have all been really helpful in making those things happen. And that certainly makes my job a lot easier. And I think when you have the opportunity to write those stories from the start, like I have in my first year on this beat, you can kind of start already to prove guys that you, for the most part, know what you're writing about, and you're not trying to do anything more than just kind of tell their stories, whether it's on track or off track. And the more you get the opportunity to do that, I think it kind of just builds on itself in some way.
Who comes up with the ideas of stories to write? You want to write a team?
It can be anyone from, I'll come up with some. My boss at the Indy Star, Nat Newell, is really great with coming up with stories. He's been at the paper for a while, and he was Jim's editor, so he's been fairly familiar with the sport for a long time, but obviously doesn't cover it from a day-to-day perspective like a writer would myself. So he's got a really good eye at looking at things from a little bit more, a little bit different, wider lens, I think, in some way. I still talk to Jim a good amount, and he's been really great at helping me brainstorm from time to time. A lot of it with our sports desk is just a big team effort, and that's been certainly helpful from someone like me who's a little bit new to this right now.
Well, all I can say is I enjoy reading what you write. To me, since the start to now, it's been a dramatic change, and you understand the sport and write well about it. I enjoy reading it, and I do from time to time. I have some friends that this year aren't coming. There's 20 of us in our group, and 18 of them aren't coming. I'm here, so obviously I'm coming. And I cut out your articles and I'll send them around, put them in envelopes and mail them to them.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I enjoy reading it. Keep up the good work. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Absolutely.
And hopefully one of these days, maybe at the media center, you can't shake your hand, but I can wave across the room at you.
We'll do that. That'd be great.
Well, keep it up, and we'll keep reading. And again, this is Nathan Brown. He writes for the Indy Star. He's the IndyCar insider. You want to read what's going on, he'll tell you. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. And one of these days, there'll be a knock on your door. It'll be me.
That's great. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. My guest has been Nathan Brown, the IndyCar writer for the Indy Star. We have one or two more upcoming, so keep an eye on us. We'll be around here. And I want to mention, I have said on numerous programs, been laughed at because I had a flip phone. I don't anymore. I got a new iPhone. I'm not sure how to use the thing, but I've got one. So I'm into the 20th century now. So everybody used to laugh at me because of my flip phone. Can't laugh anymore. I got it. Until next time, Don K. saying thanks for watching. Until next time, see you later. Goodbye.